So welcome to a first from Dora Does. This is a little case study all about yarn substitution. When I was designing the spin-off top that you see here, I decided I wanted to make a tank top version without the cap sleeves. And it occurred to me this was a great opportunity to look into yarn substitution, showing how the garment could look in different yarns, and also showing you what considerations go into substituting yarn. To add a bit of peril to the mix, I chose not to swatch or to measure my gauge for any of the second sample. I created a kind of video diary for the process, showing how I made decisions, assessed the yarn, compared the fabric, looked at the different sizing and the fit throughout the make. I start with comparing the yarns. I show you how the size of my panels varied. I look at the different fabrics I created, and importantly, I demonstrate the impact of blocking. And because I love a chat, I share some tips along the way. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the processes that go into creating a crochet garment, and I hope you find it useful. Okay, so these are the two yarns I'm using for this case study. This is the West Yorkshire Spinners Elements yarn. It's 60% lyocell and 40% Falkland Islands wool. We have 122 meters per 50 gram ball. It's a double knit weight. I chose this intentionally for this project, so I was always going to make this t-shirt out of this yarn. This is the yarn that I swatched with. I pulled this Sheepy's Terrazzo out of my stash. So this is, again, it's a double knit yarn. Content wise, this has, you can just about see it there, you probably can't read it on screen, but it's 70% recycled muslin free wool and 30% recycled viscose. So again, it's a mix of animal and plant-based fibres. It's a little different because this is a felted tweed yarn. It's obviously all recycled fibre as well. So it's quite soft, but it does feel quite different to the Elements. The Elements feel sheeny. It's a grey day, so you probably can't see very well, but it's got a bit of shine. I just know that's going to have a great drape. This feels more like, well, felty for want of a better word. It's a word. Feels almost like a cotton wool pad. So there's a kind of resistance in the movement. I think if you're one of those people that don't like cotton wool, this yarn's probably not for you. So I feel like if you put this in a hot wash, the whole thing would felt and stick together. So when I do come to block this at the end, I'm going to be very careful. If we look at the amount of yarn you get, this is quite a different ball game. Here, this is 50 grams is 175 meters. So compared to 50 grams being 112 meters in the West Yorkshire Spinners, that's quite a big difference. It's another thing that I want to bear in mind. Often if you're substituting yarn, you want to look at something with a similar fibre content that's got roughly the same meterage per 100 grams or per 50 grams. These are both 50 gram balls. This does feel very light, and you can tell straight away there's a different spin on it. I'll just compare the fibres. Here's some little leftover bits that I got. On the right we have the West Yorkshire Spinners Elements, and then on the left we have the Sheepy's. When we hold them together, let's bring you up a bit. Without kind of looking at the colours, if I pull them taut, they look a similar sort of diameter. If I had that in black and white, it might be difficult to tell the difference. As you get closer, you can see this bottom one. This is the West Yorkshire Spinners. That's got a bit more of a halo, not a huge amount. There's quite a bit of fluff on this top one as well, which is the Sheepy's. If we look against my hand, it's a bit easier to see here. So you can see this West Yorkshire Spinners has got quite a defined twist on it, whereas this Sheepy's, you can see it feels much looser. There we go. It almost feels like there's less plies in it and there's less definition, so it almost already felted together. So I think it's quite interesting to look at just how different these are when you look close up. So I think that's quite useful. The other thing to note, this one is easy. I didn't need scissors to cut that. You can just pull it apart, and that's an indication of how, you know, it's been felted together, so it's spun quite differently. Whereas the West Yorkshire Spinners, that's not coming apart. This is great if you're crocheting on the go and you haven't got any scissors with you. It also means it's quite easy to sort of felt back together if you're joining new yarn. That's obviously not going to last, but you can twist it together. You can see there's some resistance when I pull it apart. I'm also going to use this contrast colour in the same yarn for the trim on the neckline, the hem and the sleeves. So this is a quick look at the two front panels. We've got the West Yorkshire spinners at the top, the sheepies at the bottom. On first look, the sheepies, it's interesting because you can already see a difference in the density of the fabric, or I can anyway. It looks marginally narrower. Obviously this hasn't been blocked. This has been blocked and has more drape, which I will show you close up. So this is the sheepies, which is quite hard to get across on camera, but it's quite a bit of stability in it. Whereas you look at the West Yorkshire spinners and you can see here, if I pick it up, you can see the kind of movement that it has. Let's just do the same with the other one. It's not as drapey. It's a very unscientific comparison then, but so yeah, two very different pieces of fabric. Interestingly, when I overlay them, so I've got the sheepies on top, you can see it's quite considerably narrower. The row gauge is not wildly different, it's a bit shorter. The stitch gauge obviously smaller. Again, if we look at the back panel, you can see this blue sheepies is smaller than the West Yorkshire spinners. So there's probably not quite so much difference on the back as there was on the front. It may be that my tension on the back panel was a bit more relaxed than it was on the front. I think with the front and back being different shapes and the V-neck, you're going to get a little bit of difference in tension, specifically on the upper side. Again, the row gauge, not that far off if you look at the difference here. And of course, remember, this hasn't been blocked. So this is the kind of raw fabric, shall we say. I'm actually not going to block this blue one right until I've tried it on at the end without blocking. So I'm going to wait till it's completely finished to block it, which is not normally something I do. I would normally block it, the panel at this stage, and then give it a quick final block when all the trimmings have been added. So here we have the West Yorkshire Spinners Elements. This is the front and back panel. I'm just going to weigh. So that comes in at just shy of 150 grams. And then here we have the front and back panel using the sheepies, and that comes in at just under 100 grams. I used 2 balls for this and I had a small amount left, so I knew that was going to be lighter. I'm just going to convert that to meterage, and then we can tell you what the difference in meterage is. So this is the Elements version, designed to sit just on my waist. I've obviously just done the neckline and the hem. Got lots of lovely movement. It's got the ease that I was looking for, so it's quite a relaxed fit. Obviously I've not done anything with the sleeves yet. When you're slip stitching around the bottom and the neckline, you want to be careful not to make it too tight because it will pull it in. I actually redid the hem because the first time I did it, it was a little tight, so do take care with your slip stitches. So here we have the version with the sheepies yarn. It's a much closer fit. From when I showed you the panels, you could see this was smaller, so it's closer to the body. The fabric is quite different. It doesn't move in the same way the other one does. It's more static. The length is quite a bit shorter. Again, it hasn't been blocked, but actually I do quite like it. Obviously I've got to do the sleeves, so for this version I'm going to be just working this trim around the armholes to make it a tank top, and that will tighten up. You can see there's a bit of looseness here. That will hopefully tighten that up and just neaten off the shoulders. But I'm happy with the neckline around the back as well. You can see that the slip stitches on the back actually bring in the neckline. You can go a bit tighter with the slip stitches here, which just pulls in the shoulders and helps it keep some shape. The slip stitches are great in that respect because they they won't stretch as much with wear as other stitches might. So yeah, despite it being smaller, I'm pretty pleased. So here we have the finished-ish t-shirt version. So all the stitching's finished. It needs the end sewing in and a final block just to even out. You can see where the cap sleeves join the underarm shaping. So a last block will do that. I will block it first and then sew in the ends on this one. But you can see it's got a nice amount of movement and drape there. Loving the little cap sleeves. It's got the same trim as the v-neck there. And here we have the sheepies version. So this is the sleeveless tank top. I've sewn the ends in, but I haven't blocked it. You can see it's got the same trim detail as the main tee. It's got less movement. It holds its shape quite a lot. There is some movement, but it's a little bit stiffer. So we'll see what that looks like after blocking, which will be the final step for this one. So here we have the unblocked version of the tank top, where I have not measured the gauge at any point. I've just used the same hook size. It's a bit shorter. The underarms are a little bit cozier, shall we say, because my row gauge is shorter, so that is something to look out for. But generally it's just a more fitted version. This is what you want to think about. If you're just going down a hook size to make it smaller, you're making it smaller everywhere, so this could potentially be a problem. I'm going to go and block it, and when I block it I will focus on getting a little bit more length there just to make it a bit comfier in the underarms. What I could do is I could take out some of the trim. This trim has slip stitches in it, so I could relax the trim a little bit. If it, you know, if the blocking doesn't work, that might be an option to kind of correct the fact that I've not looked at the gauge. But that aside, I love the colours, it's comfortable, it's a very different fabric and fibre. I don't know if you can see that closely, but it's quite felty almost, which is the nature of the tweed. But it's quite a nice fit across the back. And yeah, I'm quite pleased with it. So this is going to go off for a little soak and then to the blocking board. So here you can see I'm blocking the tank top, and if we have a look on this side, these external pins here, this is where this should come to based on the measurement, and it is a little bit shy, so you can see it's about, this is where this should come to without the trim. So it's about my finger width, which is about just over 1 centimetre short. Now I probably could stretch it out a little bit further, but if you look at the tautness on this trim, likewise here, if I start to stretch it further, you're actually going to lose some of the nice features. So I'm going with a kind of close enough. The measurements that I really wanted to adjust with the blocking was the armhole depth. From where I tried it on that video, you could see it was a little bit tight under the armhole. So that's one of the areas I wanted to focus on. And if you are a little bit out of shape and you're blocking to kind of rectify some tension issues, then do focus on the ones that matter most. I've managed to almost get it to width. The length I've managed to add. You have to be careful with v-necks, because if you start to kind of pull too much, so if I pulled it out to get the width, then this is going to rise up, and these rows, which are just about straight, you're going to get a nasty pull around that v-neck. There's a little bit of one there already, which is starting to appear as it dries, so I might have to adjust that, but that can be really quite noticeable. That for me is good enough. I'm going to let it dry, and then we'll see how it looks on the final fit once it's properly dried out. Okay, so here we have the finished blocked tee. This was the original concept for the design. So we've got a little cap sleeve, which you can make longer if you like, with a little trim which matches the neckline and the hem here. It's got lovely movement in the fabric. It's quite hard to show when it's on, but it's super comfy. It's got about 8 to 10 centimetres of ease, so it's quite a relaxed fit, which is great for the summer. So yeah, I'm really pleased with how this has come out. I just wish the sun would show its face for a little bit too. So here we have the finished blocked tank top. The blocking has really helped with the length. It's much more comfortable under the underarms. When I tried it on pre-blocking, it was a little bit tight, but we've managed to get some space back out there. The measurements are marginally smaller in the bust, so it's a little bit more fitted than the pattern states. I wasn't going to overstretch it. The fabric has actually got quite a bit more movement post-blocking, so I'm quite surprised how it's kind of softened up rather than felted. I was worried it was going to really knit together, this fibre. But overall, I'm pretty pleased with it. Now, although in this case study, I have essentially made this one without checking my gauge the whole way through, still haven't checked the gauge, I want to add a big caveat before you start doing that. With the original t-shirt, hold that thought. So here we have the original tee, which was the original design, loads of movement, you can see really well in that. It's a relaxed fit. I swatched and I made this design based off my own gauge. So although for this one I didn't swatch, I already knew with a certain hook size I was working with my own gauge. So I knew there was a fairly good chance that I wouldn't be a million miles off. If you have a different crochet style, you've got to hit whatever pattern you're making, you've got to hit the designer's gauge, because that is how designers grade out their sizes. So this worked out really well this time, but I was only matching my own gauge. I guess the moral of the story is, yes, you can get away with all sorts, but for something like this, I would definitely still swatch, see how close you are to the designer's gauge, and also block your swatch. Please block your swatch, because so often people will say, oh, my swatch met gauge, but then they wear or they wash their finished item and it gets much bigger. Generally, it is easier to make crochet items bigger. It's quite hard to make them smaller. So if your gauge is a little tight, as was essentially what happened with this, there is room to maneuver. If it's too loose, you're going to end up with something oversized, which, depending on what you're working on, may or may not be an issue. But overall, I think this has been a success. I think there's a story about flexibility and to some extent winging it, but it's very much a case of learn the rules, then learn when to break them. So I hope you have found this useful. The spin-off tee pattern with the tank modification is now available to purchase. So the pattern comes in 9 women's sizes from extra small to 5XL. All of the size details are on the pattern page, which I'll link to below, so you can get all the extra information there. And any questions, any comments, any thoughts, please do drop them in the comments and let's have a chat.